My name is Captain Mason Grant. I'm 38 years old, and I serve as the Officer of Tactical Communications for the United States Army. 15 years ago, I enlisted with a background in systems engineering and a quiet belief that I could make a difference not on the battlefield but behind the screens, where information wins wars before soldiers even deploy. I wasn't the loudest in the room or the one with the most medals, but I was the one everyone called when the mission systems glitched 5 minutes before go time. Over the years, I became the backbone of Army Link, our secure multi-tiered communication network. I didn't just manage the system, I built it, piece by piece, line by line, through endless nights fueled by cold coffee and red alerts. Army Link started as a fragmented mess. Different bases, different units, all using different protocols. Messages got delayed, data got lost, and people got hurt. I knew we needed something unified, something fast, fail-proof, and unbreakable even in hostile zones. So I pitched a solution, then I stayed up for months writing the code. I tested it in real-time drills, and I deployed with troops just to see how it held up under fire. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of thing that got applause at promotion ceremonies. But when the commander of a forward unit could relay coordinates from a moving vehicle in the middle of a sandstorm, that was me. When a recon team patched through live imagery from a drone to a control room stateside in under 4 seconds, that was my system doing what it was meant to do. I never expected recognition. I wasn't in this for the spotlight. I believed in the mission. I believed that no soldier should ever feel alone out there, cut off by outdated software or bureaucratic delay. Army Link became their lifeline, and I became its keeper. There were only a few of us who truly understood how it all fit together. How the encryption keys rotated every 90 seconds. How the satellite failover kicked in seamlessly if one went down. How the logs self-corrected in real time to avoid jamming from foreign intercepts. Most people just saw a screen that worked. I saw the veins of the entire defense force pulsing through that code. I didn't care about titles. I didn't care about stripes. I cared that when the red light flashed, my system never failed. That kind of reliability doesn't come from manuals or protocols. It comes from knowing what's at stake. From loving something enough to make it bulletproof. For a long time, no one questioned my place in the unit. They didn't need to. Results spoke louder than rank. When comms were clean, missions ran smoother. Casualties dropped. Morale rose. I stayed in the background, watching it work, knowing I had done my part. But things change. People forget. And even systems as strong as Army Link are only as secure as the trust behind them. I learned that the hard way. That morning felt off the second I stepped through the security gate. The Pentagon is always quiet in its own way, like a place built on secrets. But that day, the silence pressed a little harder against my chest. I noticed the glances too quick, too rehearsed, like people knew something I didn't and couldn't look me in the eye. I took the elevator to the 6th floor where the communications division usually ran like clockwork, but the air was wrong. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as I walked past, and a few of the younger techs avoided eye contact altogether. At first, I thought maybe there had been a breach or a new directive that hadn't made it to me yet. That happens sometimes. But then I got the message on my secure phone. Report to conference room Delta 4. Immediately. No context. No subject line. When I walked in, 3 people were already seated. Colonel Mathers, a civilian contractor I didn't recognize, and Major Reese from Legal Affairs. None of them looked comfortable. No one offered a seat. The folder was already on the table, thick, sealed, and waiting for me like it had been printed days ago. Colonel Mathers cleared his throat and used that tone I'd heard too many times in farewell briefings. He said the department was moving in a new strategic direction, more AI, leaner structure, fewer legacy roles. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. It felt rehearsed. Like the decision had been signed, sealed, and stamped before I even walked through the door. There was no mention of Army Link. No acknowledgement of what I'd built. Just a signature line on a disengagement form and instructions to return all classified devices before end of day. I kept my face neutral. That's what they teach you. Control your breath. Don't let your hands shake. Keep your voice steady, even when the floor's giving out beneath you. The meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. I walked out with a paper in my hand and 15 years of my life cut out like a line of old code. People didn't look at me as I passed. They looked through me, like I'd already disappeared. I didn't feel anger at first, just a strange, slow burn like the heat of a wound that hasn't started bleeding yet. I wasn't ready to call it betrayal, but something inside me had started to shift. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate. By the time I got back to my workstation, my access was already revoked. I couldn't log into Army Link. The clearance codes I had built, maintained, and memorized for over a decade just blinked red like they'd never belonged to me. I tried my military email next. It froze, then auto-redirected to a page that read deactivated. The message felt clinical, detached, like it was written by a system that didn't remember I was still breathing. They'd shut down my credentials before I even walked out of the conference room. No phone call, no warning, just gone. As if 15 years of classified operations and night shifts meant nothing now that the paperwork was filed. Later that afternoon, I saw the replacement. Some kid barely out of ROTC, fresh face, too clean uniform, and a nervous smile he hadn't learned to hide yet. He stood in front of my terminal like he belonged there, like he had any clue what that system could do if you didn't handle it right. I overheard the higher-ups talking like it was a routine upgrade. Leaner staff, budget cuts, more tech, fewer veterans. He'd taken my spot because he was cheaper. That was it. Not better, not smarter, not more capable. Just affordable. What they didn't understand was that Army Link wasn't a machine you could hand off like a set of car keys. It was a living system, built in layers of logic and human instinct. I'd written parts of that code in the middle of active deployments, using field input, real scenarios, real risk. That system knew me, and now they were tossing it to someone who'd only seen the manuals. I watched him struggle with a diagnostic command that should have been second nature. No one offered him help, but no one stopped him either. It was like watching a surgeon hand a scalpel to a first-year med student and walk out of the room. There was no goodbye ceremony, no handshake, not even a final debrief. They wanted me gone quietly, like I was a noise in the hallway they didn't want to deal with anymore. And I left that day carrying something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not pride, just the heavy silence of knowing I'd been erased by the very system I gave everything to protect. Long before anyone thought of replacing me, I had already built in the safeguard. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't sabotage. It was security. The kind you put in place when you know the stakes better than anyone else in the room. Army Link was too critical to trust to policy alone. I knew the day might come when someone with no clue what they were handling would try to take control. So I designed a verification layer, a core protocol that required my digital signature for the system to function at full operational capacity. On paper, it looked like a standard authentication check. Legal, documented, approved through the proper chain of command. But the way I structured it, that was the difference. It wasn't just a key, it was a heartbeat. The system read the rhythm of how I interacted with it, patterns in code, access, timing sequences, internal logic responses. If the right pattern wasn't there, it locked. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. No, it failed piece by piece. A subtle disruption. Logs would corrupt. Updates would stall. Communication packets would drift just out of sync. Not enough to flag as an attack, just enough to break mission flow. I never told anyone the whole structure. Not because I wanted control, but because you don't hand over nuclear codes to someone still learning how the keypad works. I trained others on the basics. I documented protocols, but that final layer, it was designed to require me. Or it required nothing at all. It was legal. I had clearance. The system passed every audit. No red flags. Because technically, it wasn't a block. It was a layer of precision. One that assumed whoever ran the system knew what they were doing. Which, until now, had always been true. What they didn't realize was that Army Link wasn't designed like civilian software. It was reactive, adaptive, and deeply connected to how I built it, not just what I built. When they shut me out, they weren't just cutting off a user. They were severing the system from its primary operator. The kid they brought in, he wouldn't know what hit him. Because nothing would hit him. It would feel like the system was working, until it wasn't. Until crucial feeds started dropping frames. Until relay towers didn't handshake. Until one by one, the missions started going dark. That wasn't me being bitter. That was the risk they took when they decided to treat a living system like a simple asset. And now, that risk was ticking. Quiet, invisible, waiting. I didn't have to lift a finger. The plan had been in place for years. And the moment they locked me out, the countdown started on its own. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had always planned for the worst-case scenario. And now, they had just activated it. It started with a delay. Nothing dramatic. Just a moment when one of the relay satellites didn't respond the way it should have. They tried again. The signal was there, but the data wasn't. Then the same thing happened at Fort Bragg. And again in San Diego. Within minutes, regional hubs across the country started reporting link failures. Commanders thought it was a routing issue at first. Standard tech glitch. But the problem didn't stay local. It spread like wildfire. Entire communication threads dropped. Active field units lost real-time updates. Encrypted channels flickered, then vanished. Inside the Joint Command Center, screens turned red. One after another, the voice traffic shifted from composed to frantic. Operators shouted across terminals. Generals barked orders no one could execute. No one could connect to anything. Army Link wasn't just failing. It was vanishing, layer by layer, feed by feed. At the 8-minute mark, the entire system was dark. Total silence. No voice. No data. No fallback. Backups routed to the same corrupted framework. Field teams were effectively blind. Command couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't direct. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I knew exactly what the chaos looked like. I knew which maps would freeze, which screens would flash error logs, which commanders would realize they had no way to coordinate response teams in real time. It was predictable. It was controlled. I sat on my back porch, coffee in hand, watching the crisis unfold on a civilian monitor that pulled from public feeds. I knew it would take a few more minutes for them to stop blaming the kid they put in my seat. He wouldn't even know what he triggered. Not until someone opened a log file and saw the silent shutdown crawling through the architecture. It wasn't revenge. Not really. But it wasn't mercy either. It was inevitability. The moment they locked me out, they set this in motion. They thought they were cutting weight. They had no idea they were cutting the spine. Part of me felt sick. I had served with some of those men. I knew the weight they carried. I knew how exposed those units were now. That part of me wanted to call in, stop the fall, take control again. But another part of me stayed still. The silence on their end was loud enough. I didn't have to say a word. They would come to me, not out of respect, not out of apology, but because they had no choice. And when they did, the terms would no longer be theirs to decide. They showed up just after noon. 3 black SUVs, government plates, parked neatly outside my house like they were still in control. But the way the generals stepped out told a different story. Their uniforms were crisp, their words measured, but their eyes said it all. They weren't here on a visit. They were here because they had no other option. I opened the door calmly, let them stand in the entryway longer than was polite. Let them feel it, the silence, the weight of what they were asking. I motioned them to sit, but I stayed standing. It wasn't petty. It was deliberate. They needed to know the ground had shifted. They spoke in practice tones. Regret, national security, critical failure. They never used the word mistake. Not once, but their voices cracked just enough to show they knew it. I let them talk. I didn't interrupt. I wanted them to hear themselves grasping. When they finally stopped, I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said only what mattered. 3 conditions. 1. I return as head of tactical communications, full clearance reinstated. No oversight, no committee sign-off. 2. I want complete operational authority over Army Link. No more shared logins, no more committee rewrites. I built it, I run it, period. And 3. A formal, public acknowledgement of the error, not just a press release, a statement from the department itself. Let them say it. That I was essential, that this should never have happened. That trust, once broken, has a cost. They shifted uncomfortably, not at the first 2, those they expected, but that last one hit. Not because it was hard, but because it was honest. It wasn't about image anymore. It was about restoring what they'd tried to erase. Me, one of them nodded, slow. The other stared at the floor. The third, the one who led the conversation, met my eyes and didn't blink. We understand, he said. It wasn't consent yet, but it was the first real step. I leaned back, calm, in control, and said what they were waiting to hear. You want your system back? Then give me back what you took. My seat, my name, my voice in the room. Only then, I said, can we talk about fixing what you broke. The next morning, I walked back into the Pentagon like I'd never left. My clearance badge clicked green again. The silence in the corridor said more than words ever could. Eyes followed me, but no one spoke. The same people who had once looked past me now watched every step like I was carrying something sacred. My old colleagues, the ones who used to nod out of routine, now stood still as I passed. Some looked away. Others gave tight, silent nods, not out of respect but recognition. They understood what it meant for me to be back. This wasn't just a return, it was a reset. Command was waiting at the end of the hall. They didn't greet me. They didn't need to. The room knew who was in charge. I entered tactical ops, scanned the control interface, and pulled up the root protocol without hesitation. My fingers flew across the keyboard with muscle memory. Within 4 minutes, Army Link stabilized. Lights blinked back to green across the board. The satellite relays synced. The comm towers came back online. It was over before anyone could catch their breath. What took days to collapse, I fixed in minutes. No one cheered. They just watched. Some out of awe, some out of shame. I turned to the lead officer and said what needed to be said. Not for drama, for the record. This isn't just a system, it's trust. And when you break it, don't expect it to come back on your terms. Then I walked out, not because I had more to prove, but because I'd already proven enough. The Pentagon had swallowed its pride. I hadn't asked for revenge, I'd asked for recognition. Now, they knew who built the backbone they'd tried to replace, and they knew what it cost to forget that. The hallway stayed quiet behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing holding me down. Just the calm that comes after a storm. Not rage, not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes when the truth finally stands on its own. Life didn't change overnight, but something inside me did. I returned to my post, same desk, same chair, same title, yet the air was different. There was no ceremony, no public statement, but I saw it in the way people looked at me. There was respect now, not loud, just steady. No one mentioned the blackout. No one had to. It lingered in the silence like a lesson burned into memory. They had learned something, maybe about me, maybe about how systems aren't just wires and code. They're built with trust, earned with time, held together by people who care enough to do it right. I didn't need an apology from every voice that had once stayed silent. The way they now listened when I spoke was enough. The way they waited for my lead. The way the room paused when I walked in. That was the apology. That was the victory. At home, things felt lighter. I slept better. I took longer walks. I laughed more with my daughter over breakfast. The kind of peace that doesn't come from a medal or a headline. Just knowing I'd stood my ground, and it had meant something, that I didn't have to shout to be heard. I just had to hold the line. Sometimes, the world thinks strength looks like noise. a raised voice, a slammed door. But real strength is quiet. It's patient. It waits for the right moment. And when it speaks, it doesn't need to raise its tone. It just tells the truth and lets that truth stand. I used to think dignity was something others gave you. Now I know it's something you choose to keep, even when no one else sees it. Especially then, the silence around my return wasn't empty. It was full of acknowledgement. That's all I ever needed. So I moved forward. Not to prove them wrong anymore, but to keep doing what I've always done. Build, protect, serve. I don't need credit on a wall or applause from a room. I just need the work to be honest and the mission to be clear. And if one day they forget again, I'll still remember. Some victories don't come with noise. They come with peace. And that, to me, is enough.